Hello and welcome everyone. My name's Judd Hendricks and this is our Friday Enneagram Community of Practice gathering. We are now doing this at 12 o'clock instead of 3 o'clock, so I hope that doesn't throw you off. If you're seeing this on our Facebook page at 3, then you've missed the Zoom call, and you're always welcome to join us on the Zoom call. And you're also welcome to join us on Facebook Live. So I want to welcome all of you that have joined in our conversation today. We are launching a new series with the Enneagram community where we will be talking about, we'll be taking a day to look specifically at one number. So it's kind of a deep dive into that number. And we'll also invite panelists and individuals who identify as one or identify with that number to come on and share a little bit about their story. I've talked about this before, but I am a big, it's called the Helen Palmer narrative tradition. Helen Palmer is one of the folks that's worked with Enneagram, and she really thinks it's important to learn about the Enneagram by hearing people's stories about the way they experience themselves, and then deciding maybe what number you are based upon that rather than on taking a test. And so I really appreciate that work that Helen Palmer does, and really believe in panels for people to try to give us a little more of a taste rather than some kind of a rational description of what they are. And so I want to welcome folks that are being willing to be on panels this semester, so to speak, as we look at Enneagram numbers. So I specifically want to thank, as we get going, Teresa Martin, who's is a 1 and gonna come on in a little bit and share how she experiences herself being an Enneagram number 1. So as normal, I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I will use to work through the numbers. And again, I am always happy to share this presentation with you. If you want to message me or whatever, I can send you the link to the Prezi that has all of this information in it. So welcome everyone again to the Enneagram. A little bit more about Interfaith Paths to Peace and why we're focusing on the Enneagram a lot. We understand peacemaking to involve interpersonal relationships at the level of friends, family, lovers, partners, organizations, and communities. And one of the first tasks, I think, in peacemaking is that we are able to understand ourselves, what we call the inner journey of waking up and self-awareness. And so we're trying to promote a variety of different practices that help us with our self-understanding, because when we understand ourselves better, we're more able to both have compassion for ourselves as well as to have compassion for other people. And so if we're going to have peaceful relationships, then that needs to start with having our own sense of peace and compassion and harmony within ourselves in order to bring that into relationships. So this inner work is really important, and that's why the Enneagram is such an important and powerful tool, is it gives us some ways of seeing ourselves or understanding why we may do the things that we do. And we hold that in a sense of compassion. We're not trying to box people up or say this is always the way you show up. We're just trying to look at what we would call personality traits or tendencies towards perception and behavior. And I'm kind of in the in-between school. Some people say that you come into the world, with these archetypes or these patterns of behavior. Some people say they're more nature versus the more nurture versus nature. So, and I'm somewhat in between. I think we do come in with these maybe archetypical DNA patterns that are part of our biological DNA, but maybe part of our soul DNA as well. And I also believe that early childhood development plays a really significant role on the way in which we have personality characteristics in the way in which we cope with the world. So the Enneagram is going to take kind of, at least the way I talk about it, I'm going to take kind of both of those hats. But more specifically, what we can look at is how did our early childhood and environment shape the way in which we perceived reality, what we became aware of, what we were aware of in the field, and how we honed our perception towards certain things, and then what were the patterns of behavior or responses that helped us to thrive or survive as children. And the idea is that these personality characteristics, or these neurological brain pathways, got put in place early in life, and for good reasons, because they helped us thrive or try to thrive. The challenge is when those patterns become so locked down that we are not able to be free to respond in different ways, or we're not aware of what's happening in the environment that we're not aware of. Because, for example, we're going to look at Enneagram 1 today, the reformer. And so to put this into perspective, the reformer became very aware of doing things good, right, and well. And that is often how they got attention, or they got what we would call the blessing, the family blessing, or attention was given because they did things right or well. I'm going to pull up the reformer right now, but to give us some things to look at. But I just want us to be aware that these patterns of perception, and also then these behaviors, got enacted at an early age. And so we always have compassion for ourselves, right? Because we all grew up in different situations. Even birth order makes a difference in how you grow up. And so we hold ourselves, when we're looking at Enneagram numbers, it's like we're looking at a small child that needs to be held with compassion and gentleness, and with great awareness, because that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at these early childhood patterns. Now, the beauty is that those can change. And so we're not always locked into that. We're going to look at what we call levels of health. And what that's going to describe, this is over here on your right, looking at levels of health. The idea is that at certain times we are more locked into those patterns of behavior than others. And that's what neurosis is that we are acting in patterns and perceiving things that are very limited. And we have a very low scope of choices of behaviors to make. And that's when we start getting into challenges, because there's more happening that we're not aware of, and we have more possible behaviors than what we're able to actualize. And when we get healthy, we get more free from that. We're able to be more present to the situation, take in more information, because we're not hooked into our old patterns, and we're able to choose different behaviors that would fit the situation. So that's basically understanding of Enneagram work. So for those of you that know, there are 9 types. In fact, I'll show a little slide here of all of the personality types and show where we're going to be headed over our time today, the next 9 weeks. So this is a little symbol of the Enneagram numbers. Again, these are caricatures, and one of the things that we're going to be looking at and making some stereotype characters of these different numbers. But here is the Enneagram as a whole. Again, there's 3 different sections, or 3 different areas. They're the heart triad, which is the 2, the 3, the 4, the head triad, which is the 5, 6, and the 7, and the gut instinct triad, which is the 8, the 9, and the 1. And specifically today, we're going to be moving into what we would call the instinctual triad, or the gut triad, and specifically looking at how these three numbers or how the one deals with anger, which is a key issue for all three of these dynamics. They deal with that differently. They deal with their instinctual energy differently. And today we're specifically going to be looking at what's called the number one, the perfectionist or the reformer. So I'm going to go back to our chart and we're going to jump in looking at the characteristics. And then we'll open it up here both to those of you that are joining us on Facebook Live and Teresa, who is with us on Zoom. We can flesh this out a little bit more. So the type 1, the reformer. So one of the things I want to look at is the early kind of childhood experiences, often that type 1s describe. They, again, received attention, love, grace, felt like they belonged to the degree to which they could be good and do things right. One of the things that ones often report is that they have over-identified in some way with what we would call the parental ego, or what we would call the super ego. So there's this function in the psyche that parents often feel of teaching us what is right and wrong, helping us to order our lives appropriately. And ones really, in some ways, over-identify with the parental image. And so therefore they take the parent and they internalize it and identify with it, so that they have this voice in their head that is often telling them what would be right in this situation, or what would it be, what should you do in order to be good, and that's how you get the blessing. So they're scanning the environment. One is that ones often report they're not often aware of this, but if they do some work, they can become aware that they're often, when they walk into a room, they're aware of what's not right about the room. Or when they read something, the first thing they read is what's not right about the grammar. Or when somebody's doing something, they're aware of how this is not quite right or good or perfect. And you can see that energy, right? Why they do that is because if they were going to get the blessing from the family, then they had to do it right. And if you didn't do it right, you didn't get the blessing. So they're always looking for, how can I do something right? How can I do it better? And ultimately, how can I be perfect? So you can see how that parental image or that parental voice is really strong in the back of the minds of ones. And it's always kind of there. They always report that even when they do some work, it's pretty easy to tap into that voice that's saying what's right, or what's not right about this, and then how can you make it right. So they're called the reformers, and they really are, healthy ones are really wise people. Because they've done a lot of discernment around what should happen here. They take in information. They're usually pretty rational people, because they think about things. They think about choices. They're usually ordered people. We'll look at the Myers-Briggs. Almost all ones end up being J's on the Myers-Briggs, which is the what's called the judger. But it's somebody that likes order and control and likes to order their lives that way. And so the reformers do that. They're very, as you can see, at the top levels, a wise realist, very reasonable person, and a principled teacher. They know these principles kind of about right living, what's wise, what's smart, and they want to teach other people those principles. So they're not only concerned about themselves, which they are, first of all, concerned about themselves doing things right, but they're also very concerned about things being right in the world, being ordered, being principled, and there's a right way to do things. And ones show love by helping other people order themselves. or that's one of the ways they care for people. So I've been loved by several ones in my life, and my ex-wife is a one, and often what I would have to tell myself is that them pointing out something I did that wasn't right or how I could do it better was actually a form of love, because it often comes to people as criticism. And I think ones have to be aware of that they're wanting people to do things right and well, which they're usually correct on, often can come out as criticism or being negative towards other people. And so you can see as ones get less healthy, that's one of the dynamics that starts happening specifically in interpersonal relationships. They become more critical and shaming, not only of themselves, but of other people. So you can see in the middle levels here, level 4, 5, and 6, the idealistic reformer. So there you can see it's idealistic. It may not be connected to what's real. They just have this idea of what ought to happen. And it may not all that be connected to reality or even to what's possible, but they want to reform that. And as you can see, they start moving down into the orderly person, judgmental perfectionist, not only of other people, but of themselves. And at the lower levels, you can see how this internal critic really becomes controlling, and they move into some really levels of kind of depression here, because they feel they can't do things right. They're not going to be able to do it right. And they're not tolerant of themselves, but they're also not tolerant of other people. And so some of these lower levels, you can see the punitive avenger is when a one is locked down into their self-criticism voice. So those are some characteristics of ones. Again, ones that are healthy. I think I've got a slide that shows some ones in the world. Some of the famous ones that we know in the world. I think I've got a slide on that. Yes. Here are famous Enneagram 1 personalities: Hillary Clinton, Gandhi, John Paul II, and Al Gore. And you can see how they are reformer types of people, because they have a vision of the way the world ought to be, and they really order themselves to make that happen. And in their healthier ways, they can be really, they do like being police officers, teachers. They like administration, where things are really clear and they can order themselves. They can be great champions for social justice and social reform. They have an ear not only to what's not right in the environment, but what's not right in society. So a lot of the energy for protest and change comes out of people being deeply concerned that our world is not working the way they ought to think it ought to work. They're very concerned about morality. There is a morality around things, and they order themselves according to that morality, but they also expect everybody else to do that, which in many ways is good, right? So the idea of justice, that's a really big concern for ones. And the movement towards justice right now that we're seeing in our culture, ones can be at leading that cheer about what's just, how do we treat people fairly, what's equitable, and they can really give their lives and energy and passion to making that happen in the world. So this is really a deep time to bow to the morality and the energy of ones, because they have a deep sense of justice. On the Enneagram, this is the Enneagram slide. So Enneagram, if you know your Myers-Briggs in the Enneagram, ones, and we can look at these numbers a little bit that tell us they're all J's, right? So they're all in the judging Myers-Briggs union category of judging. They're in between an F and T. This is interesting to me, that ones are often identified between T and F. Ones are pretty rational, reasonable people. I think this is the connection between, if you're a one with a wing 2, you're probably an F. And if you're a one with a wing 9, you're probably a T. So ones with Enneagram wing 9s are a little more rational and they're a little more introverted than ones with an Enneagram 2 wing, which would be more feeling and more extroverted. So that's, I think, what you see here in the ones. So they can be extroverted or introverted, sensing or intuitive. And I think this is a real interesting, most of the numbers, those can go a lot of different ways, except for the J, but the other ones are really, I think that's one of the things that makes ones really interesting, at least in comparison to Myers-Briggs. Because usually in a Myers-Briggs, you'd have a lot more of the numbers being a lot more of the letters being the same, but there's a lot of variation. And I think that's related to 9 and to 2 as their wing. I haven't read that anywhere, but that's just kind of my hunch. So, and maybe Teresa, I don't know if you know what your Enneagram wing is, but maybe you can help us there when we get to that. So here's a chart that I really like to look at. I guess we could go back to our this chart. Here are the wings, the idealist and the advocate. Again, that nuances their number a little bit, and we can go into that more if we need to, want to. Lines of integration and disintegration. So let's look at this. A line towards integration or is towards a 7. And so 7s, what happens with ones that move to a 7 is they realize there's maybe not one right way to do everything. They become a little bit more flexible, like 7s. They also are free from their super ego, and they can tap into their inner child. The inner child as an archetype in the 1 sometimes gets repressed. And so 7s are like they're very in touch with their inner child. In fact, they may be over in touch with their inner child. They're kind of the free or the puer, pan types. But 1s, when they're free from this critical parent, they can be like a 1 on vacation looks like a 7, because they get away from all of the stressors, all of the things. I have to do it right. I have to do this. I have to be ordered. And when they get free from those voices and those responsibilities, all the many responsibilities that one take on themselves, they look like 7s. They can be more spontaneous. They can flow with things. They can be more playful. And so that's really a place of integration. 1's going to a 7. 1's going to a 4 different, and you can see what happens is they can move into melancholy, and it's often because they feel overwhelmed from the stressors of trying to do everything they take on. 1s and 2s are very similar in that way. 1s take on a lot. They feel like they have to do everything. If it's going to be done right, and if we're going to do it well, then I have to do it. And so they often have these huge checklists of things that they feel like they ought to be doing. And they have a lot of responsibilities that they take on because they need to change it. They need to do it. And so 1s can be, that can become so overwhelming. They move into this kind of melancholy. I'm not going to be able to do it right. I don't have time. I'm overworked. I'm overstressed. And they move into this kind of sadness and can look like depression, in some ways like 4s. They can have melancholy like 4s often manifest. Their instinctual variance, we've talked about this. There are 3 types of instinctual variance. That's the SP is the self-protective. The SX is what we call their interpersonal or sexual type. And the SO is what we call the social type. So in the self-protective type, self-control is kind of a primary dynamic. Let me go down to, I'm going to show you another screen. And this screen is taken from, this is the way Susan Rhodes understands. She uses archetypes, but she often divides the numbers in the work that she's done So this is Susan Rhodes. Again, she uses archetypes, but she does these 3 categories, which are self-preservation, sexual, and social. We were just talking about them. So what she's done is, you can see she's looked at the wings, the one, here's the primary, and then she's divided them between the categories of self-protective, sexual, and social. And she gives an archetype or a name for each of those. So let's look at those real quickly. For the centerpiece of those, she has a self-critical perfectionist. For the sexual type, the intense lover. And for the social type, high-minded civilizer. And then if you're a little more towards the 9 wing, she has the conscious detailer, the self-contained lover as the sexual type, and the social type is the reserved arbitrator. So you can see how the 9 type leans a little more toward introversion and towards thinking. And then the 1 that moves towards the 2 with a wing, the social or the self-protective type is called the concerned citizen. The sexual type is the impassioned lover, and the social type is the social reformer. So if you take all of these kind of archetypes, you have a pretty good sense of some of the main characteristics of ones. And again, this is the work that Susan Rhodes has done. So we could go deeper, and we'll go deeper, but I'd like to open it up now. And we've kind of jumped into some stuff, but Teresa, I would love, thank you for being on and being a 1 who's willing to share their story. And I guess what I would ask you, I'll go back to this main slide. Yeah, talk some about the way you understand yourself to be a 1. And again, it can be similar to these, it could be different than these, but maybe tell us, maybe some stories about being 1, how you experience being 1. That would be really helpful. Thanks for being on today. This is Teresa Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm a yoga teacher, and denied the fact that I had anger for probably most of my life. So when I learned about 1, that's why I like to say I'm a reforming perfectionist, because it really is that recognition of how much I structured my life. Even being a yoga teacher, I'm in control.
Yeah.
Right? I bring peace to the room. I make people feel better. They do what I say.
There's a right way to do the asanas.
Yes. And realizing that when I learned about the Enneagram, it was mind blowing. But that's how I am. The intellectual piece of it, and it gave me the freedom. It actually really helped my relationship with my husband. He was like, I can't even put the groceries away because you have to have them in a certain place. My younger sister was funny because she's like, but you know how to do everything. Like we're kind of fueled the perfectionist too.
Sure.
Is that she always looked to me like, you know how to do it. What do we need to do? You know how to do it. So that walking into a room and seeing what was wrong immediately, I've had to work on a lot. And there's also the gift of seeing somebody's perfectionism, right? Like seeing their wholeness, where my older sister shared with me that sometimes you hold such a high standard for us that it completely overwhelms. It completely is intimidating because you can see what's there, but we can't, and it just kind of diminishes everything. So my biggest thing though is just realizing, like I said when I showed up today, if anybody knows me and is watching this, they're probably laughing like, wow, she didn't take a shower. I always shower. I have curly hair. It always has to be put together. My clothes have to fit just right. Everything has to be very, very comfortable inside. Like, so I always felt that I gave people a lot of room So a lot of people think I'm a 9. I really believe like this would be a very good example of a 1. Like, I don't know how anything can fly with 1 wing. So when it comes to the Enneagram, I really believe I have 2 wings.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think I'm a 9 because I am the peacemaker. I am the one who I can be very easygoing. But then when I tell them what's going on inside, what is to the fact, like, if my husband could really tell you my things. Like, I even have to, when we go out to eat, I have to sit a certain place. The groceries do have to go in a certain way. I'm not so much the pillows on the couch in every picture of my house. Actually, if you looked at my desk right now, you'd be like, you're a 1. You look pretty 7 right now. But as soon as I learned about this need for control at a level that was just beyond fear, but was really in this, moving from this judgmental perfectionist to letting go of the order a little bit and just letting the wisdom come through. Like, my latest thing right now is, this may seem like too much, but I'm working with my spirit guides and really working with that energy of joy. And how do I realize that it can be organic and it can be fun and it can be playful? Because when things aren't just right, I shrink completely. And what I like to think about with the 4 and going into stress is that it comes back to having to be so authentic. Like, I can't just half truth anything. It has to be real. Like, my dad would tell you, I'm honest and brutally honest. So learning that perfectionism was controlling me so much and killing my joy completely, that finding that way of finding ways to release anger. When I realized that that pretending or internalizing anger was huge. Like, I remember working with a therapist, and she was like, well, you have PTSD. And I was like, oh, do not tell a yoga teacher that she has PTSD. I got so angry, and I got home, I was like, oh, well, maybe I should reflect on that a little bit. And it started to uncover in such a way that I was controlling my emotions. Like, I had to always be happy. I always had to look good. I always had to present everything as if it was under control, as if everything in my life was in complete order and complete. That once I started realizing I can be angry, and that the world, everything changed. How I teach changes, what I do for a living changes. I encourage people to get angry. I kind of push people to cry now, not in a bad way, but in that ability to realize, like, I was destroying myself internally by not releasing, like, always striving. And yoga did not help. It really created a lot of spiritual bypassing. Because it was giving me these practices that were very much like, you meditate every morning, you do the practice, you teach people, you walk the talk, that if I couldn't walk the talk, I wouldn't take action at all.
Yeah. And it just became, well, I guess the criticism, but also, like, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not kind of a helpless, not going to do it at all kind of.
Yeah. Like, if I could reject myself first, then nobody else can, right? Like, if I can see the flaws in it before anybody else, then I have power and I still have order, right? So I don't, that idea of being vulnerable is intense.
What, do you mind, are you a firstborn or
I am third. I am
the third.
Born. Yeah, so I have older sister, older brother, younger sister. But I grew up, there's 5 years between my older siblings, 7 and 5. So my younger sister and I really had that sort of like middle girl. It's why some people think I'm a 9. Middle girl, middle sister. But then also really was the oldest sister to my youngest one, because my older sister wasn't involved.
Yeah, right. So you're maybe functionally firstborn, or
And all my siblings would tell you I was the parent, and still am. They come to me. Work on those boundaries. Like, I'm the one who knows what to do when things are in crisis. They all come to me. So, which isn't really, even my parents. I remember being young and telling my parents how to get it together.
Yeah. So, right. It is the young, it's the young child that became a parent or an adult pretty quickly, taking on adult responsibilities, adult, ways of ordering their lives. And you can see why children, for a variety of reasons, do that. I mean, there are different reasons, but you can see that, that forming early on, that control, really becomes a driving force for ones. The need to control for different reasons, but control is an important dynamic.
I really love too how you said with your ex-wife, like realizing that telling you how to do it differently, those are my words, by the way, was her way of showing love, because it's something I'm aware of, but it still comes out, and it is true. Like, just even the other night, how great my husband's cooking me dinner. It's been really intense, as it has been for everybody. And it was just not at all what I thought it was. And I was like, and I stopped myself. I think it was just like, but it was like, I was so grateful, but that was all I knew what to say.
Right. Like,
so that was an interesting thing. Like, I don't
doing
know.
gratitude, I've heard from a lot of ones. So we look at sometimes practices for different groups. And for ones, a gratitude journal is really helpful because they can just become more aware of what's not right. And a gratitude journal is cultivating a different firing of the brain, so that in the morning or at night to go to bed and think about, what was I grateful for today? Like, what worked well today? What was right about today? And what was right about me, to move past that perfectionism. Like, I didn't do everything right, but I did do some things okay. And just being okay with doing things okay is a real challenge.
Yeah, like I had, my husband knows not to come home and say, what did you do today? It's like an explosion, right? It's like, how was your day? Or how do you feel about your day? But don't ask me, what did you do? Because I never did enough. Never.
Right. You always feel like, Here's some tips, and Teresa, you could fill in here some things about building relationships with ones. One is communicate clearly and reasonably with them, because if you can make a reasonable answer or a reasonable response, ones appreciate that usually. Like they have a wisdom or a way of rationally kind of understanding things. And some report that they don't, it's hard to be, if you're overly emotional, that's hard in communication with ones. And so they would like for you to be reasonable, rational. It's not like you can't be emotional, but if you're overly emotional, they don't know how to work or process that. Second thing is check in with them about stress and offer help. Again, I don't think we realize the internal stress that ones have because of all the things they feel like they need to do, and they need to be done right. And I think that's one of the things we often need to do with the ones in our lives is say, how can I help? And then do it the way they need it to be done. That doesn't always have to happen that way, but if we're going to offer to help, a lot of times ones feel like, oh, I've got to do it, because if I have them do it, they're not going to do it the way I need to do it. So if you're not willing to do it the way the one does it, then don't offer to help, because that becomes more stress for them, I think. And Teresa, you may help me there if that's true or not, but to be able to ask them, do they need help? And if you can help, try to do it in a way that they need it to be done. Otherwise, they get stressed because they're going to have to do it over, or they're just going to have to take it back on themselves. But also, we want to tell ones is they need to learn to be more flexible with that. So, right. So that's a give and take with ones, but I think something we need to be aware of. And the third thing is stay focused and serious at first, specifically if you're working with a one in your work. Get to your work first, because they have this need for things to kind of go in order, and let's be serious, let's get our work done, and then we can be social. But don't try to just do a lot of chat. Don't try to waste time is a really hard one for ones. So jump into something and be ordered and structured, stay focused, and then you can be flexible more towards the end or social. Teresa, do those resonate with you, or you would add
absolutely.
something?
I think ones don't even like to work with other people.
Yeah.
I think about it. I'm an entrepreneur, and I like to call myself a soulpreneur, really in the sense of like the idea of collaborating with somebody is just like, it'll slow everything down, right? Like even just as a parent and having to collaborate with two young kids, and that they're clearly not going to do it. Yeah. Not just to my adult standard, but to this perfectionist. And the stress part too, I don't really feel that I ever thought I was stressed. Like that's part of the bypassing. Because I would never even admit to the fact of how much I was trying to stay in charge of everything. And there's usually that saying, oh, I'll just do it myself. I'll just do it myself. And so we don't know how to ask for help. Like, and even saying, I think when somebody offers help, that could erupt them a little bit, because then it demonstrates that they don't have it together.
I'm not capable. Yeah.
Right. Like, that it's just such like a blow to the ego, really. I can't even get this done. So it goes into that really deep, dark 4 space.
That's interesting. Yeah. So how we ask to help them is important, because the hot buttons down here is don't criticize or shame them, because they're already doing that to themselves. And that's what we really need to know, is that ones are already criticizing themselves. They already experience a lot of guilt and shame. And so if you add to that, they can crumble under that as well. So when we talk with them, offer ways and, support, but don't criticize or shame.
Yes, absolutely. I remember I had this vision one time. I was actually teaching yoga and had so much going on in my life. And I saw this image of juggling balls and just keeping all the balls in the air. And this was not really great. But while I was teaching yoga, I was like, what would happen if I just let them fall? And it was like so intense to even think about, even come up with that idea of actually giving myself permission to let the balls fall. It's kind of like, okay, I need to check in. Something's not right. Because I couldn't even give myself, like, it was so hard to have that thought of that it can all fall apart. Mm-hmm.
Well, you can see how intertwined that thought is, because if I let everything drop, what does that say? That that I'm not doing things right, I'm not doing them well, and then that's internalized, and I'm not going to get the love and attention that I need. Again, it always comes back to these key things of how do we feel like we get love, attention, and belonging. Mm-hmm. And that may not be rationally true anymore, but we don't know that as you could look around and say, well, of course, everybody knows that, but the existential anxiety that comes for all of us, right? It's not just, it's all of us in different ways. There are these messages that are deeply tied to our feelings of belonging and love. And so you can see how that messaging for ones is really hard, because they're already, already critical of themselves in many ways. Mm-hmm. So other hot buttons don't question their integrity around that. They're usually telling you the truth and being honest. But if you question that, that's very hurtful. Do what you say you will do. If you say you're going to do it, then do it. Because ones will do what they say, often at their own expense. If they tell you they're going to do something, they'll do it, and they'll do it well. And if they don't do it, there's a really good reason why it didn't happen, because they've really pushed themselves to make sure it happens and happens well. And don't chronically, I'm sorry there. Don't chronically be tardy. Ones tend to, they don't mind you being late sometimes, but if it continues to show up, that can be kind of a push for them. And that's kind of specifically if you're working with a one, be aware of that.
I was raised by a mom who was a one as well.
Oh,
And so it just kind of from that kind of love and belonging idea of childhood, like I remember seeing her just erupt in such a level of things. Now, granted, she had 4 kids and whatever. There's all these other details, but it's been helpful for me to remember the version of my mom that I didn't like. So part of the practice for me to get out of this critical, or that my dad was innate, always late. And it really did, like, he wasn't late. He whatever, he had a lot going on. But that sort of sense of seeking that approval, not like a 3 is doing, but the self-approval, the need to be okay. Like, I even had to work with the gratitude idea of getting out of the idea of gratitude that it was perfect, you know, of really doing the work of the gratitude around, you know, the simpleness of, like, I have a bed to lie in, like because it even can push the idea of your highest self, right? Calling in your soul, and that it can push that perfectionism really intensely.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction to make, and I think helpful for ones, the difference between the parental ego and the higher self. And here, because the higher self only has compassion. The parental ego has a criticism with it. And I think that's a real big distinction. How do we rest as our heart? Because our higher self, and here we're going to use a language set that, you know, but the soul or the higher self has nothing but grace and love for the egoic self and all parts of the egoic self. And I think that's really important, to be able to rest in this natural compassion that the higher self or the soul or life or love has for us, and just receive it, you know. And if you sense that it comes with a sense of judgment, that's not the higher self, because it doesn't have that. It has no need. Love has no need for shame, blame, and guilt. Those are tools of the superego or the parental ego or the controlling ego. And so we can watch ourselves do that. That's the other thing, is like, what part of me is shaming me right now? You know, what part of me feels like needs control right now? And then the question is, what part of me is watching that? Now that is the true self. The part of you that's asking that and then witnessing that self, that's the true self. Because it can witness it, it can watch it, it can hold it, and it can embrace it all. And I think practices, as you're saying, that allow us to rest in that space are really important. To watch the critical ego come up in meditation, you know, where does the critical voice come from? And to watch it, like, okay, I didn't do that right. Who's saying that? Or I need to do it this way. What part of me is saying that? You know, who is that? Where's that voice come from? Is that my parent voice? What if I don't need that voice? What if that voice wasn't there? Or what's another voice that's speaking to me? It's okay. There's grace. There's forgiveness. This is good enough. Right? It's hard for ones, right? This is good enough.
Yeah. I've actually even changed it to say just enough. Like, it's just like, it's just enough, because the good enough means that it even still, the enough.
Oh, that's good.
Right? Like,
oh,
so
nice.
It's kind of my mantra right now at this time. It's like, just enough. That's it. That's enough. That enough is still more than the average enough, right? So
I really appreciate that, because I think that does play into using good enough, just plays into that paradigm. So it's just enough. Yeah, I really like that. I hadn't heard that before, but I appreciate that framing of that, that mantra.
Oh, I even find, like, in meditation, like, really been working on it. I'm like, well, any energy that I'm tapping into isn't going to yell at me. You know, isn't going to, I can't remember. I think it was Kyle Gray. He was talking about how if you can't get there, think of, like, how would your angels look at you, right? Or how would that person who just, like I sometimes say, like your great, 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 great grandmother would look at you and just love you, because it can be really hard for one to even get out of that pensive space to see themselves as something that is enough, like to even get to the enough piece. It's tough.
Yeah. And I think my experience, or at least of hearing ones talk, also for ones to be able to learn what emotion they're having, because most emotions are safest as anger, or they come out as anger. But if you look beneath anger, there may be something else there, sadness. There may be, probably sadness or grief. But the safest one is anger, specifically self-anger, or anger at the self-criticism. But asking ones to nuance that, to be aware of joy, to be aware of their full emotional range that sometimes only comes out as anger or criticism. And I think that's important for ones to learn their emotional intelligence. It's important for all of us, but I think specifically ones.
But it's the learning my emotional intelligence and giving myself permission to feel all the things. Now, I'm also really big into astrology, so there's like this other layer of it too, but has been a life changer. As soon as I realized that I could understand, I had a lot of empathy is a strong suit of mine. I had to learn how to have self-empathy. I had to learn how to realize that the world wasn't gonna all end if I told somebody that I was that sad, right? Like I might have known I was sad, but there was no way I would tell anybody else that I was sad.
Because that would show some kind of not being perfect, or because sad people, there's something wrong with you.
Feel it, right? Yeah, something wrong. This is a little personal, but it's also, I've realized like there's that feeling of being a burden. Because if I can't have it all together, then I mess up somebody else's world. And so I really, like, that was the thing about learning about the Enneagram, is this internalization piece of the emotional intelligence, and giving, like, I've learned how, it's probably not good to say out loud, but anybody that knows me as a yoga teacher knows that I try to be really transparent. That's also the other thing I've shifted to do, is like, be transparent, because that way I'm articulating out loud and helping. So like if my kids, my voice will get loud. I have Italian ancestors, but like I will go outside, and if I'm gonna dig in the ground and I have anger, I yell, I scream. I've learned how to get it out, because otherwise it feeds into more of that perfection energy. So the emotional awareness piece is
and then that cyclical, I'm getting angry at myself because I'm getting angry.
And then what's wrong with me? Why am I angry? Oh yeah, it's just the downward spiral of it too. Like I've learned to realize, like, I'm gonna fall. There's gonna be a downward spiral, but I'm held. I'm supported. The world won't end. I'm not gonna die. It's gonna be okay. But I say all this casually, but
no,
this
I hear
is
you.
a lot of work and a lot of effort. And it is a constant reminder. Like even today, I found this butterfly in the grass, and I was like, oh no, it's hurt. And I was like, oh, or maybe it's a baby butterfly. And then, because I have to constantly have the conversation with the inner critic of, oh, you probably killed it. Oh, you probably did something that there's something wrong with the milkweed you have. I mean, it's loud. The volume of it is intense. And so I picked it up and it sat there, but I had to sit there and say, it may die in your hand and it's not your fault, right? Like, it's not because of your imperfections that's causing the pain for anybody else. And it flew away. It was really beautiful. It was really a very spiritual moment, but it was funny because the whole time, and I was laughing, because even just coming onto this call today, and we have a lot of connections in the community, but I was like, oh my gosh, this voice is so, everything I'm doing right now is criticizing how I'm going to show up.
Yeah.
And it's wild. And I can't imagine what I would be like Which I thought about. I was like, oh, maybe it's just too much for one to show up and expose themselves, right?
Well, I want to say, yeah, we're coming down to the end of our time. I do want to say, yeah, Teresa, you're I know you said that a couple of times, your honesty and vulnerability, but that's the beauty, that when that happens, other people give themselves grace as well. So like when you name that, we all know that. I mean, we all know different dynamics of that, but so thank you for naming it and being real with it. And I think that's what it takes for us as a community, is to be able to name those places. And also for, you to know that there is a great deal of grace and love and acceptance, especially as people just show up as themselves. And I think that's what we all really want as a community. And you've done a beautiful job of giving some deeper insight into the Enneagram 1. You've said some things today that really clicked for me, that I didn't really have language for, and seeing this kind of internal processing that happens with ones. So I do want to, we're come to the end of our time. I do want to end with direction of growth. So Teresa, these are some words we say to you: relax and learn to delight in life. Discover that life is not always grim and serious. Happiness is a legitimate response to existence. And the great burden is lifted from me, the burden of unnecessary perfection. So Teresa, we also hold that for you today, and hold you in love and grace and light. So thank you for being on today. I appreciate it. And for those of you who've been watching, thanks for watching. Again, our Enneagram Community of Practice is now Fridays at 2 o'clock. So, at 12 o'clock. So I hope you'll come back and join us. Next week, we will be moving down into the heart triad, and we'll be looking at Enneagram number 2. So if you know of a 2, or you're in relationship with 2, join us next week at 12 o'clock as we explore a deep dive into Enneagram 2s. Thank you all for joining us today. May you have a blessed and whole day. And Teresa, we give you a deep bow and blessings on your day as well. Peace.